Idakuyepi, Ampetiwashte to everyone. Wachiapiwi, Machiapi, Lena, Shitango Lakota, Imataha, Chante Washte Nape Chayuzapi. Good morning, relatives. It's good to see all of you today. Cheryl Crazy Bull, the president and CEO of the American Indian College Fund. My Lakota name is Wachiapiwi, which means they depend on her. And I'm from the Chichango Lakota, who are the Rosebud Sioux tribe on the Rosebud Reservation. I'm really happy to have you join us as we continue our Indigenous activism speaker series. When COVID-19 first really hit the country in March, and then we had all of the very important social justice work that started in our communities with the deaths of some of our Black brothers and sisters. The College Fund decided that we didn't want to just make a statement of solidarity. We wanted to be a part of the activism that's occurring. And so we saw a really great opportunity to bring some voices into our Indigenous higher education community to talk about ways that we're impacted by racial and social justice and issues of equity, like in the health area, as well as education. So we've reached out to leaders and activists in the Indigenous community to help them, to bring them to us to work on this Indigenous activism speaker series. It's a series of webinars that you can view not only live, but also on the College Fund's YouTube channel. If you go to the College Fund's advocacy page, it'll take you into that space. For today's presentation, I just ask that if you have questions for the presenters, if you put them on chat, we'll be able to see them. And if we have enough time at the end, we'll invite them to respond to that. So today is the 6th of our 7 webinars, Invest or Divest. And it's an Indigenous discussion of police funding. So I know only too well that in many of our rural and reservation communities, we actually have a lack of resources in law enforcement, but we're really part of a much broader discussion about what is the role of policing. And we know from experience and from the data that Indigenous peoples are disproportionately impacted by police violence. And it's really critical for us that we be well informed as Indigenous peoples about this issue, beyond the way that it impacts us, often in the rural and reservation communities where our tribal colleges in particular are located. So I'm real happy today to have 2 panelists who will share a broad overview and then have a discussion, kind of a fireside chat or a morning coffee chat kind of discussion about police funding, particularly from an activist and youth perspective. Edgar Villanueva is a globally recognized expert on social justice philanthropy. He serves as the chair of the board of directors of Native Americans of Philanthropy, the NDN Collective, and is a board member of the Andrews Family Fund that works to improve the outcomes for vulnerable youth. He's currently the senior vice president at the Schott Foundation for Public Education, where he works real extensively in grant investment and capacity. One of the things I'm most proud of about Edgar is that he is the author of a book, Decolonizing Wealth, that became a bestseller and is a very informative look at the ways that colonization has impacted philanthropy and social finance sectors. And I urge all of you to, view some of the YouTube videos where Edgar participates in discussions about this. And also, if you can, buy his book. And I made a huge mistake. I should have worn my Decolonizer t-shirt, because he also has Decolonizer t-shirts. And I just really am proud that he was able to make that contribution, because philanthropy and equity in philanthropy is just so important to all of us. It's what the College Fund does in order to support our students. Then I'm also happy to introduce Anthony Pasaltomaz, who's a Chicago native. And I just discovered is actually his Lakota side is from the Rosewood Reservation, which is where I'm from also. So I'm really happy to meet him. He's a 2015 Center for Native American Youth Ambassador under President Obama's Generation Indigenous, or Gen I initiative, which many of you are familiar with. He's also been recognized by the Center for Native American Youth as a champion for change in 2018 because he's done a lot of work in the Chicago area, confronting misconceptions about Native people in Chicago and around the country. He's currently supporting the Center for Native American Youth by serving on their Youth Advisory Board, and is also very active with the United Nations National Intertribal Youth Organization Unity, which of course many of you are familiar with also. Particularly intrigued that Anthony is very focused on land-based education and really works to ensure that the community does not lose its connection to the land, and helps community members plant medicine gardens, which I think is just a really wonderful thing to be doing, Anthony, and I thank you for that. So I'm going to turn it over at this time to Edgar and Anthony so that they can share their thoughts and experiences with our audience. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Cheryl, and greetings to everyone watching today. Really excited about the conversation, and really excited to be also speaking with Anthony, a good friend of mine and an activist that inspires me all the time. So we are going to just begin our time together today. I'm going to provide a high-level overview about the campaign that's happening right now around defunding police, and just share some perspectives on what I see happening nationally. And then I'm going to invite Anthony in to speak about his work and really how this work shows up every day in organizing. So let me share my screen here. I have a few slides just to help with some of these facts and figures that I'm going to share with you. One thing to understand when we think about divesting from policing or investing in other things, two things come to mind for me about social justice work in general. It almost always comes down to money. If you think about any challenge in our community in terms of environmental injustices, you think about racism, you think about policing, mass incarceration. There are people who are getting rich off of oppressing our people and oppressing Black and other people of color. So this really is about money. It is about many other things, right? It is about oppression and domination. But ultimately, money is a really big part of what's going on right now in our country. And it always has been, right? When you look back at colonization in the US, we know that colonization and the taking of land, genocide, slavery, all of this was connected to accumulating wealth through violence and greed and scarcity mindsets. And those are pervasive dynamics that are remnants of our history that are still very much at play and are very much connected to the current movement to defund police. Over the past 30 years, this is a really cool photo that I like from Ben & Jerry's. I also love Ben & Jerry's ice cream, right? It's so good, and they support this work. This shows that over the last 30 years, at both the national level and the local level, governments have been dramatically increasing their spending on criminalization, policing, mass incarceration, while dramatically cutting investments in basic infrastructure and slowing investments in the social safety net programs. So you see here in this graphic that the US police budget is $115 billion, billion with a B, right? While other very important services provided by the government are just getting fractions of that investment, right? We have a public education system in this country that is grossly underfunded, but yet we keep increasing the budget for policing and mass incarceration. And so this is fundamentally a major part of the problem. The defund the police movement, what defund the police actually means to me, some folks say, do you literally mean to defund the police? Like literally. I will say literally, this is what I mean, that we need to defund and abolish the police department, abolish policing as we know it for several reasons that we'll get into. But defunding the police means divesting funds from police departments and reallocating those funds to non-policing forms of public safety and community support, like social services, like youth services, like housing, like education, healthcare, and other community resources. Since June, as Cheryl mentioned, with the murder of George Floyd and this the ongoing organizing from the movement for Black Lives, this slogan of defunding the police has gained more popularity. And ultimately what folks are calling for, one, of course, is to stop killing us, right? Like there are folks who are being killed on a daily basis by police. And ultimately, at a policy level, there are many demands that the Movement for Black Lives have. And one of them is to actually divest or defund the police and reallocate that money into other types of services. We know that when you think about safety, just think right now, imagine a place that feels like a safe community. Do you imagine a place that's filled with police? No. You imagine a place that is filled with resources. And so increasing the number of policing does not equate, increasing policing or the number of police in a community or in a school does not at all equate to that place being more safe. What creates safety in communities is actually resources, right? So we know that there are other ways to keep us safe. And when we have resources for education, when we have employment opportunities, when we have stable housing, we see a reduction in crime. And so we don't need to police or put people in prisons if we have ample resources to take care of our families. I also want to note that in this moment, everything is about money, but it's also about race, right? So in all of these issues that we're talking about, we see a disproportionate impact on people of color, right? And so in this movement for Black Lives is focusing on Black liberation. It's focused on stopping the unarmed murdering of Black folks, the lynching of Black folks by the police. And this is an issue that we as Indigenous people need to be in deep solidarity around. We'll talk some more with Anthony about this, who's doing some of that solidarity work. We as Native folks need and must stand for Black lives. We need to address anti-Black racism in our communities, because if we're honest, that exists. It's a real thing. And for us to be, as Native folks, to pit ourselves against other people of color, especially Black folks, is exactly what the dynamics of colonization want, right? That scarcity mindset, that internalizing of whiteness, right? That begins to put us in a position of thinking that we are better than other folks. And so we need to all check our own biases and racism and decolonize our thinking and be in deep solidarity, because our liberation is deeply connected to Black liberation. In this moment where we're seeing this amazing power building around Black liberation, this has opened the door for so many opportunities in our community. We recently, we all have heard about the victory with the Washington football team, changing of the mascot's name, which I know that you'll hear more about in your next series. This is a campaign that Native folks have been working on for 30 years, and we want to give honor to those folks. But in this moment, thanks to the Movement for Black Lives, we were able to accelerate and push through and accomplish that victory. And so as we're building and supporting power in Black communities, we will also benefit from that as Native people. We also should know that this particular issue around police brutality also impacts our community. Native Americans are 3.1 times more likely than white Americans to be killed by police. And so we often, we don't hear about this issue as much in our communities. It's often unreported. When a Native person is killed by police, they may, not know what race or ethnicity we are and code us as something else. But we know for a fact that we are also experiencing this oppression in our communities. And so it really behooves all of us to be a part of this movement to hold police accountable. Here's just a graph here that shows that we're actually more likely to be killed by law enforcement than any other racial and ethnic group. We have a very high incidence rate for deaths by policing in our communities. And so this is an issue that we all need to focus on. My last remarks before I bring Anthony into the conversation: the work that I do around this issue is very much focused on schools. And because you guys are students, I wanted to just highlight a little bit of the work that's happening to create police-free schools, right? We're calling for divestment in policing in general at the citywide level, but also we have policing happening on campuses in schools that are also creating, adding to this criminalization of Black and Brown and Indigenous young people. And it's also creating the school to prison pipeline reality. Often the first point of contact with the police system for young people is in schools. And so this is specifically some work that I've been funding and supporting through my work at the Shot Foundation. Here are just some stats I want you all to see how serious this is. When we think about schools, I'm talking about K through 12 right now, education. 1.7 million students are in schools with cops, but no counselors. Right? So where are our values when we invest more in policing young people, but we're not investing the resources in actually helping to support them and protect them? 3 million students are in schools with cops, but no nurses. Right? No nurses. 6 million are in schools with cops, but no school psychologists. And then 10 million are in schools with cops, but no social workers. So even when we think about the limited dollars that we have for public education, a huge amount of that budget is being spent on policing as well, right? And so we need to divest in policing and actually invest in the supports that we young people need to thrive in schools. A few other stats here. 24% of elementary schools have some sort of school police. These are children who are being, handcuffed and drugged down hallways. You've probably seen the videos. 42% of high school students have some sort of school police. 51% of high schools with high and Black Latino student enrollment have some sort of school police. So every day, young people are being put in situations that could easily be escalated and are being put in contact with the system or thrown into the system for very minor offenses. And we are creating criminals out of young people through this current system, and we got to change that. There's a major movement happening right now to actually have police-free schools. This is a map of all the campaigns that I'm currently tracking at SHOT. We are so excited around the progress that's happening. Right after the murder of George Floyd, we saw in Minneapolis, the public school board there voted to terminate the contract with the Minneapolis Police Department, removing all police from schools. They also directed the superintendent to come up with a new plan for school safety, and that did not involve, the police department. We also know that in Minneapolis, there was organizing at the higher education level to end the contract with policing as well on university campuses. By ending this contract, Minneapolis public school systems will save $1.1 million a year. What can we do with $1.1 million to support young people, right? And y'all know this is mostly Indigenous, Black, and youth of color that are being policed. And so now we have new resources that will be invested in supporting those students to succeed. And so I'll stop there because I have a lot of questions for Anthony, but ultimately, what I want to say is that grassroots organizing works, right? What we're seeing right now in terms of the pressure to defund police, to cut these budgets, to get police out of schools is a result of grassroots organizing. And this is what it takes. And so all of us have to be organizers. And we'll talk about some ways today that you all can get involved in this movement. So speaking of organizers, really excited, Anthony, that you are on this call with me, and want to hear about your work, and around pushing back on this criminalization of Native and Black and other youth of color. Tell us just a little bit about the history of your organizing work in Chicago. What have you been up to?
Of course. So first off, thanks for having me. Um, I am Pacific First Nations Cree and Chichangu Lakota and Black, and so I am from the city of Chicago, born and raised. And a lot of the work that I do is really tied into both of my identities, being Black and Native, in a city where, you know, I'm constantly criminalized. One of my main goals is really to change the narrative of how, you know, Native people are viewed here in the city of Chicago. I live in a city where, you know, we have monuments that are praising white supremacists and that uphold white supremacy. You know, I live in a city that has, you know, our hockey team is the Chicago Blackhawks. And so there's constantly these false narratives put out by non-Native people for Native people. And, you know, so I'm constantly trying to address that. You know, one of the main reasons is, you know, in a city with over 2 million people living in it, you know, walking down this street, part of my identity is always erased, you know, specifically to police officers or just any random person walking by me on the street. I'm just viewed as just a little Black boy with a big fro walking down the street, right? But there's a whole other part of me that is that fights for visibility. And so you heard a little bit about in my bio, but a lot of what I do is with my youth council, Cheyenne Nations Youth Council, in terms of land-based education. So that's taking people here out in the city of Chicago and teaching them about the land that they're living on, right? And this ties in, you know, with our conversation today, because when we talk about land, you know, it's constantly used as a force or as a tool to gentrify neighborhoods or to continue to police communities of color, particularly here in the city of Chicago. You know, Native people aren't allowed to practice their culture without gaining permission from the city, right? It used to be we weren't able to go on the river without asking for permission. We can't tap trees here in the city of Chicago during maple season without asking, because those are the city's trees, right? And so, you know, while other people have, you know, the freedom to practice their religion or to practice their culture, you know, Native people in urban areas are still you know, policed. They're policed, you know, not only by, you know, what we know as the police, you know, the people walking around with guns in our neighborhoods, but also a lot of our neighbors. Our neighbors are policing Native families too when we're practicing our culture, because while it's not foreign at all, it's foreign to them. And so a lot of what we do in our council and myself is addressing that and normalizing that, because a lot of the times, you know, as Native people, my aunt always says that you are the only one in place, but you feel out of place a lot of the times, right? Like, this is our home. Chicago is, you know, my ancestral territory, and not a lot of people have the liberty or the privilege to say that they're living where their ancestors would have traveled or would have traded, right? But I do, and I take that to heart when I go out into different communities in the city of Chicago while teaching about our culture.
Thank you for that. Yeah, you know, I really resonate with, you know, growing up also urban. I currently live in New York, but I grew up in Raleigh, North Carolina, and I was the only Native in my high school. And I had an incident with police right after I had graduated from high school and was in college at the University of North Carolina, where I had visited my mother, and I was driving back to campus, got pulled over by police, and you know, and I was thinking, oh gosh, maybe I was speeding. And as I go to pull over, all of a sudden I look, and there were I was just completely surrounded by dozens of cop cars, and it was a case of mistaken identity. They were looking for someone, and apparently I looked like the person. And when I pulled over, I was instructed to throw my keys out the window and to put my hands up and back toward police. And when I got to them, I was, you know, they grabbed me, handcuffed me, put me on the ground, and I was there for over an hour being questioned. And you know, at the time, I didn't know all of the things that I know now, right, about how we are specifically, you know, as Black folks, brown folks, Native folks are targeted at a disproportional rate. And I'm also so aware that if I had even sneezed while I was like walking backwards, I probably would have been shot. There were guns pointed at me from behind me, in front of me, from across the interstate. There was actually a helicopter flying above. And so that quickly, an innocent person, you know, can be found in this situation where I was already assumed to be guilty because of the way that I looked, right? And so this is what we're fighting for right now, because it's all too often that folks who are innocent are being criminalized and murdered by the police. And we're not saying that like all cops are bad people, right? But what we know as a fact is that there is a history behind of racism that exists that's connected to policing. Anthony, what are your thoughts around like why, like what is that history of like Native folks, Black folks in terms of policing? Where does this all come from?
Yeah, I think you brought up a really good point. You know, here in the city of Chicago, there was actually a report put out by the Department of Justice, or DOJ, you know, specifically targeting the tactics that the Chicago Police Department use, and how they're, you know, intertwined with racism, you know, towards, you know, communities of color here. And, you know, police in general, you know, I think we all know a general overview of why police were created. And originally, you know, police were created to, you know, hunt down slaves and return them back to their, to wherever they, you know, you can't own a human, but to wherever they escaped from.
Yeah.
And so, you know, when we talk about that and how that is tied into policing, they may not blatantly do that today, but this is the system that our current policing is based off of, right? When we talk about, you know, policing in the Native community, you know, we talk about the bounties that were put out for Native people, and that is tied directly into policing, and that is the same system that we have today. You know, it may not be so blatant, but it is the very same system. So when we talk about abolishing the police, yes, we're talking about abolishing the police. We're talking about abolishing a system that was originally and still is set up to be racist and to actively work against communities of color, specifically Black and Indigenous communities. You know, we shouldn't have, you know, Native children, Native teens, Native people in general, Black kids, Black teens, Black people in general shouldn't have to fear walking outside their home, right? I work for an alderman here in the city of Chicago, so I work for a city councilwoman, and you know, my commute to work is 5 to 7 minutes at most, and in that 5 to 7 minutes, because you know the office is in my neighborhood, it is where I live, you know, I have a fear of constantly being pulled over by the police. And that fear is inside me all of the time. Anytime I leave my house, whether it's to go for a walk or to go for a drive, right? I'm constantly thinking of ways like, oh, what am I going to do if I get pulled over? Who am I going to call? Right. And these are, that is a trauma. That's a trauma that's instilled in me. And if things don't change, it's most likely, traumas get passed down generations, right? And that's something that I don't want, when I have kids or when they have kids. That's something that I don't want passed down to them, because, I should be able to walk outside my house and freely live my life without fear of, being shot, or if I'm going to come home tonight, right? When we talk about police, it's a very weird subject, and not for a lot of people in our country, because sometimes they have aunties or uncles that are police, right? Specifically when we're talking about Native people, when we're talking about tribal communities, um, it, it I think it's important to recognize the fact that, a lot of our family members in Native communities, outside of when we focus on those rural communities and those reservation communities, a lot of the times, they know the police officers that are policing their communities, because they're a part of the community, and they are them. They're Native people, typically riding around, just do, essentially doing what police would do, police communities. But we still have to recognize the fact that that system that they're currently operating in is still a system that was created with Western ideologies, that is still created to actively work against our communities, because we didn't actively, as Native people, we didn't actively walk around our our communities actively looking for crime, seeing if people are doing something bad to get them in trouble, right? And this notion of sending police out into communities to look for crime, to get people in trouble, is absolutely absurd to me, because when we have people, who constantly go to the police, a real life example was, I was being stalked and followed, and someone had came to my house, and the police station. The Chicago has, I believe, 50 different districts. I live in the 17th district for our police district, and it's maybe about a 3-minute drive from my house. And so as I was being followed in my car, I pulled up to the police station and I went inside and I told them, right? And so when that happened, they said, we can't do anything until a crime actually happens. So this notion that police prevent crime, is also not true. We're constantly told, police are constantly telling communities, well, we can't do anything until a crime actually occurs. And so when we have people saying that, well, policing is going to make our communities better, it's not. Governments, whether it be local, state, or federal, are constantly defunding a lot of our social programs. They've been defunding schools for years. They've been defunding mental health programs for years. And so when they defund those, there is an uproar, but it's not met the same way when we talk about defunding police, because it's a lot of the times people just let it happen. And I'm not saying that myself or you or the communities that we're organizing with let it happen, because I can assure people that people like us and people we organize in our communities fight like hell to make sure that funding stays in communities and in neighborhoods that need it the most. But a lot of the times, we live in a system, and we live in communities where the narrative that brown people are causing crime is put out there, and people believe that. And it's not just white people that believe that. It's people in our communities. It's Native people. It's Black people. The anti-Blackness we have here in the city of Chicago, even in our Native community, is through the roof. And it's certainly hard, very hard to continue to do work here because of that anti-Blackness in my community. But it's just that alone is a history in itself, and it's just something that you persevere through. But tying it back into like the history of policing, you see it started with one thing, and then there's a chain reaction of things, and then this is how we got to this point that we're in now.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, the origin of policing in this country, and then the proven connection to white supremacy groups like the KKK historically, just really demonstrate that policing has racism in the DNA of it. I'm for folks who are listening today, I'm wondering, because you're in Chicago, Anthony, I'm in New York. This isn't the real Empire State Building, but I'm in Brooklyn.
Mm-hmm.
For students and others that are in rural parts of the country, I'm wondering, is this an issue that they should think about? And what about in our reservation communities that have tribal police departments? What are your thoughts around? Should this matter to those folks?
Yeah, I think it certainly should. Chicago is currently the third largest city in the country, and one of the main hubs for urban natives in the country. And so when we see, our police budget here in the city of Chicago is, around $1.7 billion with a B, and we spend about, I think it's around $4 million a day in policing, and the city of Chicago was able to do that because our former mayor actually closed mental health clinics here in the city of Chicago in Black communities, and redirected that fund towards police. So when they do that here in the city of Chicago, what's to say that they're not to do that, in your community? And let's, it's also to mention that, over 75% of Native people, Canadians, live in urban areas. A lot of us go to schools off the reservation in urban areas. And so the laws that are created go to school, or where your extended family lives, or where you possibly might live one day, certainly affects you, right? Because how we police here in the city may be different how we police in rural areas or reservation communities. It ultimately, there is a model that has to be followed. And typically, we'll look to, urban hubs in our country where we can model programs after, right? When we talk about Portland, Oregon, they have a program called Cahoots, where they send out, a crisis response team when someone is in need of mental health help. Why can't we do that here in the city? So why does the city have to be last, right? But that's also to say, why can't we do that in tribal communities or rural communities, right? Particularly when we talk about Native people, a lot of the times calls to 911 are in response to some type of crisis and we don't need people, even if they're part of our communities, even if auntie or your uncle or your grandma or your grandpa, we don't need people with guns and pepper sprays and batons to come and defuse those situations. You need a trained professional, you need a social worker, you need a psychologist, you need a nurse. Those are the people that you send out to address crisis responses, right? So a lot of the times, here in the city of Chicago, I do recognize the privilege I have in terms of, the resources that I have here in this city, right? able to address uh, multiple different issues with the tools that I have at my disposal, and I could just reach out and grab them. And that's not the same for many communities. A lot of the times, tribal communities just rely on the police, and sometimes some communities don't even have police. They have to rely on their county police or the sheriffs or whatever it may be. Those are particularly dangerous too, because those people are not native, and they do not know the laws around native people, and so it just becomes a very dangerous situation when I think when we separate the two communities in terms of our three communities, in terms of like tribal, rural, and urban centers, in terms of thing, because it's the same model, right? It's just on scales or different levels. Um, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I'll say from my experience as someone who has encountered law enforcement, had guns pointed at me from the story I shared earlier, but also just relatives who have been incarcerated and in and out of jails, and having the police around, busting into our house, and being followed by police most of my life, and that trauma is real. And even when I'm in tribal communities and I see tribal police, I still feel a sense of trauma and fear in my gut from even if they're also native. I know that we as Native people, I'm just always thinking about how we can go back to our old ways of doing things and to our original instructions, because our ancestors just knew a better way. And I think with community safety, there are, as you sort of alluded to earlier, Anthony, just ways of keeping our communities safe and orderly and protected that do not involve, violence and imposing fear on each other. I see in the chat box, I encourage folks, we have about 15 minutes left. If you do have questions for Anthony or myself, feel free to put some questions there. We do, back to looking at a few of the comments and questions, back to the question of our rural communities, reservation-based schools. We know that we see the same types of problems with policing, with school resource officers, security personnel, cameras, metal detectors. It's if you haven't been to a school in a while, I get into schools from time to time with the work that I do. I'm just alarmed at how schools are beginning to look and feel more and more like prisons, and not safe places of learning. And this whole school to prison pipeline thing is so real, and it's all rooted in how we criminalize young people of color, right? And the bias that is held by teachers, by school resource officers, by police, when a child of color is in the classroom, and the moment they walk in the door and is seen as a problem kid, or a kid that's going to be, misbehaving or causing problems, where this starts in the work that we do at the Schott Foundation, really is around zero tolerance discipline policies. We see and understand the data that kids of color are expelled and suspended from schools at a much higher rate for doing the same offense as a white child. And when kids are suspended or pushed out of the classroom, they cannot learn, and then they are pushed into the system. And because we have invested so much in policing and divested so much from the supports that teachers and schools need to help kids, teachers are often left with limited choices. It's like they don't have restorative justice practices or counselors, and so they have no choice but to send kids to the office to deal with SROs, and and this all just escalates. So we have to think about push back on all the narratives, as Anthony was describing, these narratives that we all internalize every day from TV. If you're watching TV, you see like 9 times out of 10, the bad guy in a TV show is a person of color or a Black person. Shows like Cops that just romanticize these false narratives of creating fear in communities. When you watch the evening news, like 99% of the time you're hearing about crime and stories, and the person that's arrested is a person of color, where white people are out committing the same crimes all the time. We just don't hear about it. And so there's a very intentional force at play to criminalize people of color, to make it okay to, when people are saying things about recent incidents, like, well, what was this person doing to be shot 7 times in the back? I don't care what the person was doing. An unarmed person shouldn't, there's no reason that an unarmed human should be shot 7 times in the back by police, right? And so we begin to justify these behaviors because we ourselves are internalizing the messages that are put out in the mainstream. I want to shift towards the end of our time, Anthony, to just really hear about some of the awesome work. We've kind of been talking about the problem a lot, and I hope folks have had time to learn as we're unpacking kind of why policing and investing in policing is problematic. I want to hear a little bit about the solidarity work that you've been doing in Chicago, the fantastic mutual aid work. I know through Decolonizing Wealth Project, we were able to make a grant to the Chicago American Indian Center, and just all the wonderful work that you guys have been doing to support and lead our community through the COVID crisis, through pushing back to showing up right now in this movement for Black lives. We'll love to hear about some of the work that you and the Youth Council have been engaged in.
Yeah, so, I think when, especially when we talk about policing in our communities, ties in beautifully, because these are the programs that we are all actively fighting for. And so when COVID initially hit, in terms of, our state going on lockdown, we were stuck inside for a while, for a good cause, and a lot of Native community members followed the stay-at-home order, wore a mask if they needed to go out. It eventually got to a point where some people, either lost their jobs or they weren't able to get any food for their home, particularly elders or people with small children or babies. And so initially the American Indian Center started receiving food donations from the Chicago Food Depository. They were probably about this big, and they were filled with non-perishable items, so things like cereal, macaroni, something that could possibly get a family through the week with what was in the box. But and a lot of our youth council members were actually helping the American Indian Center distribute those boxes to not only Native people, but people in the Indian Center is located in Albany Park, which is also my neighborhood. So the Albany Park, which is one of the most diverse neighborhoods actually in the country. So we were able to not only serve people, but people beyond our community. But people in our council seen that when it came to Native people, we only ones that weren't receiving help from our community in terms of like receiving healthy food. So the Youth Council, which is actually autonomous from the Indian Center, actually redirected our funds. So we actually had funds set aside to go to Unity. For everyone probably knows what that is, but the largest Native youth gathering in the country. And so we had about 4 to 7,000 put aside for that trip. And so, those Native people, we thought back to, well, what would our people be eating now to stay healthy? So, part of that conversation within our youth council, was berries. So, we went to a local supermarket, and we bought, I think initially it was like 100 cases of berries, 100 cases of raspberries, blueberries. And we did that for about 8 weeks. And we did deliveries to people across the city. So it wasn't just, the main idea was we didn't want Native people leaving their house during the pandemic. Us in the youth council are between the ages of 14 and 24. So we're, and most of us are fairly healthy. So if anything, I would want to put my body on, than have an 86-year-old elder go out to the grocery store just to get a loaf of bread. It's not worth the risk. So we did that for maybe about 5 to 6 weeks by ourselves, using the Indian Center as a staging location, till it got to a point where we were able to start doing whole grocery lists for people. Beyond fruits and berries, we were able to get, things like disinfectants, toilet paper, things to clean people's house, cat food, dog food, the whole 9 yards to make sure people truly didn't have to leave their home, because that was, our main goal. And it eventually got to the point where George Floyd happened, and then the American Center actually started getting whole food boxes of produce to go with the to hand out to people. So our youth council kind of took a step back, and that was totally okay with us, because as a youth council, we should be the ones that, but with us being an autonomous youth council, there are, and us being the youngest or Native organization here in the city of Chicago, orgs just have a lot more resources than us and can tap into those resources. So once the Indians did that, it was nice to be able to take a step back, and then we were able to kind of redirect our focus in terms of Black liberation and solidarity, because, thing that I, always say, and before we end, is, when we talk about lives matter, all lives don't matter until Black lives matter, is a very true statement that we should all hold dear to our heart, because, once Black lives matter, going to recognize that Native lives matter, that Latinx lives matter, that Pacific Islander lives matter, right? Similar to when, how our communities are constantly fighting for the environment, and, fighting against pipelines that are coming for our community. We have solidarity among other communities, and, they know that, pipelines running through, a tribal community, it isn't just their issue, it's an everybody issue, because when one person's are affected, everyone's rights are affected, right? So, when we have these social movements, it is really important to keep in mind that, solidarity and coalition buildings are some of the main things that we have to keep in mind while we're working in our communities, because it's not going to be one sole group that gets to police it, or gives this to police free schools. It's going to be all of us working together in solidarity, with a coalition that is able to stand to the people that we currently have in government, or to the people that are currently policing our community, to say enough is enough. You're not going to continue to abuse us anymore, and the line stops here.
Absolutely. No, I appreciate that. That push for solidarity. What is really obvious to me in this moment of heightened awareness around racial justice and movement for Black lives is how multiracial it is this time. if folks who are engaged in Ferguson, it's very different, especially, you know, Black folks on the front lines. And what I am seeing around it's just beautiful watching Minneapolis to see their Indigenous relatives on the front lines, hand in hand with Black relatives. The AIM office in Minneapolis opening their doors, taking care of protesters, providing water, food. And so it is really about solidarity. And we as Native people inherently believe in all human relations, right? And this is so important for our own freedom, our own liberation, to stand up in this moment, and for us all to be organizers. We're wrapping up here. Anthony, just one final word maybe you want to say to our participants who are mostly college students about like urging them to be a part of this movement, to be an organizer, to be an activist, and not to be on the sidelines watching. What would you say to just encourage and ignite some fire in our participants?
Yeah, you know, I would say, I would get back, you know, I am a college student myself. I'm going for social work and public policy. I understand that it you know, life can get very hectic and very busy at times, especially now. You know, I am not an online learning type of person. It is very hard for me to grasp some of the concepts we have in school, you know, but just push through it. And, you know, even if it's just stay in your home and making calls or sharing Facebook posts, you know, around that's happening in your city, you know, that counts as doing the work. That, you know, getting out there and fighting for Black Lives Matter and fighting for, you know, communities of color. You know, everyone has a role in movements. You know, some people burn from the inside, some people burn from the end, some people speak, some people don't. You know, I would encourage you to find your role and fit in. And, you know, it is okay, especially now in the times that it is okay to take a step back from things and say, you know, I need to focus on my health, or I need to focus on, you know, this class for this week, right? We need to recognize that burnout is a real thing, especially when we, you know, school, when we have family issues, when we have, you know, all of the movements going on. You know, you are one person spread across 3 days. You will get burned out. So before that happens, recognize that is going to happen, and it's okay to tell people no. And it's okay to take care of yourselves before you step up to the, you know, to go fight for something much larger than yourself, because it's going to be exhausting. But, you know, while it's going to be exhausting, you know, you're still, and there's still a place for everyone in a movement.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Anthony. A few links we put in the chat here. Anthony has posted an Instagram, Twitter, or echo on my end, sorry. The Chi Nations Council. So please follow there. My contact is also there. We put a link in also to the Chi Nations Youth Council and to the Decolonizing Wealth Community Response Fund for folks who are interested in that. We are funding mutual aid, Native-led mutual aid work around the country. And then finally, around police-free schools, I put a link here for the Shot Foundation, where I serve as vice president, for folks who want to learn more about the police-free schools movement and get involved in that work. So Cheryl, I'll invite you to come and say a closing remark. Thanks everybody for having us.
Thank you. Thanks, Edgar and Anthony. I do encourage people to follow you and go to those websites, take a look at what's out there. I really appreciated, Anthony, the encouragement that you gave there at the end of the ways that people can be active. That's been part of the focus of the activism series. A couple weeks ago, we had Matt Remley and Jalene Joseph on, and they talked about living a life of joy as an act of decolonization and living in direct action. And so we've had a variety of different ways that people can approach it. We had a presentation on how to work within the system to change the lake in Minneapolis to Bidimaka and the change of Ogallala Lakota County from its previous name of Shannon County. So there's just all kinds of resources in the College Funds Activism series. So I just thank both of you for sharing today and for the work that both of you do. I know it's hard work to stay motivated, and thank you for going to school, Anthony. We really believe in education, and we know that it can make a big difference. I just want to close reminding people that in 2 weeks we'll have Emily Whitehat will host Crystal Echohawk to talk about visibility and representation and to continue to visit the mascot issue. And I want to close by going back to what Edgar said in the beginning, because I think we all are in that place of visualization. And Edgar said, imagine a place where you feel safe. And I just encourage everyone who's listening and who will go and view this, imagine a place where you feel safe, and then put your activism into making that happen. Put your activism into making a community that's a sanctuary. And we really want you to do that, because if you can imagine it, you can make it happen. That's what our ancestors did, and that's what we want future generations to do. So thank you again, both of you, and hang in there.